On the Friday before Christmas, our U.S. government shut down due to lack of funding. Or at least it was partially shut down, as any of these shutdowns that have gone through in history don't actually entirely shut the government down. As of Thursday, when I'm releasing this video, we will be tied for the longest shutdown in government history. And we will be looking at a situation right now where our government workers are going to be looking at not getting their paychecks if they are on the furlough list, whether they are working or not. So at this point, there are going to be some actual consequences to this, even if the workers are going to be getting back pay from this shutdown. But let's go back and review what this government shutdown means, especially given the fact that it's partial. As I talked about when we did our first shutdown video, which will be linked in the description below as well as in the end cap, all of the functions that our Congress deems essential to the American way of life will continue to happen. Social Security will still go out, and it will still go out in the U.S. Postal Service mail system, and our military will continue. TSA continues to work, our country continues to function, and we continue to have interstate commerce. Even though the National Highway Traffic Safety Board is shut down, we do still have our interstates open. All in all, unless you're really hardcore about going to national parks in the middle of the winter, this entire government shutdown really only affects about 800,000 people. About 380,000 people are not working at all right now, and 420,000 people are working without pay currently, even though they will be getting back pay at the end of the government shutdown. Among all of the workers that are working without pay currently and temporarily, and among all of the workers that are not working at all because their jobs are deemed unessential by the federal government, our Congress is still getting paid for this entire time that they have the government shut down. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez brought up an interesting point when she talked about the fact that Congress was still getting paid during this, saying that Congress themselves should stop getting paid. I'm sure that when Cortez brought this up, she was intending for the fact that it would cause Republican Congresspeople to cave and pass the budget that the Democrats want in government, but it was seen as a sign of strength for a lot of people who would have otherwise dismissed Cortez, until she was asked about it again on TV, asking if she would give up her paycheck, which she avoided answering. If you watched the video that I put out yesterday about my drinking game, you already know that the Twitter sphere is just awash with Democratic senators and Democrat representatives from the House telling the sad stories about everybody who is negatively affected by this government shutdown. If you were to look and only see the stories that they're putting out, you would expect to go outside and see a post-apocalyptic wasteland right in your own little neighborhood. Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, Eric Swalwell, and Elizabeth Warren have been the most vocal about all of this, telling us about people who are dying or intending to die, people who are going to lose their houses or cars, just over the fact that our government is shut down. Not mentioning, of course, the fact that everybody is going to get fully back paid in advance when the government opens, even though we don't have a clear-cut day as to when that will be. There are many people out there that don't want to see the federal government open back up. And on the surface, I am one of those people, even though deep down I do understand that there is a role for the federal government in our modern society, and we are eventually going to open it up back anyway. I'm definitely not in a hurry to see it happen. But we do need to take some time and look at some of the options that have been on the table to open it up, both recently and back when it all started. After being taunted by Nancy Pelosi during a press conference, on December 21st, Paul Ryan's House of Representatives came together with the GOP and came up with enough votes to pass a budget through the House. Pelosi, of course, said that they would never pull the votes together to put the budget through the House, needing a 60% vote in the House to do so, and sent the bill over to the Senate. There were a lot of people that were prodding Mitch McConnell to use the nuclear option in order to get the bill through because he had the votes to do it by the nuclear option, but McConnell punted that down the road because he didn't want to see it used against him in the future. with no Senate Democrats willing to reach across partisan lines in order to pass the stopgap bill that would have kept the government open and kept all of these federal workers getting paid throughout the entirety of a government shutdown that wouldn't exist at the time. The bill died in the Senate, did not get to the president. The government ran out of money at midnight on December 22nd, and we entered our government shutdown. On January 3rd, a new Congress was sworn in, and if you follow the Twitter feeds of many of the prominent Democrats in both chambers of Congress, you will see a common thread. There have supposedly been several bills in just a few short days that have passed through the House with supposed bipartisan support that the House is then sent over to the Senate. And according to many of the senators that are posting about the topic, Mitch McConnell has chosen not to hear any of these bills and chosen not to vote on any of them. It's important to keep in mind when you look at the Senate vote on any of these bills that would pass across to the Senate, what the stigma is behind the Senate voting on these bills and making a bipartisan coalition in order to get to 60 votes and get these things passed, especially if they don't have any funding for the border wall, which seems to be at the center of all of this. I'm constantly on Twitter reminding all of the Senate Democrats the fact that they were the ones that killed the bill in the Senate, none of them being willing to reach across partisan lines in order to get the 60 votes needed in order to pass the budget. But I do understand what was going on in their minds and what was going on in society when they chose not to vote yes on any of these bills and keep the government open. Sooner or later, every Democrat senator is going to come up for re-election. It might not be in 2020, but the internet does have a long memory. And everybody on the left is going to remember which Democrats reached across partisan lines in order to pass a budget that had wall funding in it. In today's polarized climate, that would be a recipe almost immediately for a primary challenge in that incumbent's district. That incumbent would not enjoy the comfortable re-election campaign that he or she would have otherwise enjoyed, and I think we should hold our Republican senators to the same standard. If a bill does come to the floor at all and it doesn't have any sort of border funding, any Republican that reaches across partisan lines without any sort of compromise coming back from the left should face a primary just the same way that the voters for the Democrats threaten to hold their politicians to the same standard. If that's the way that Democrats want to play in this country, I do think that Republicans should hold their politicians to the same standards. I don't know how the government shutdown is going to end, but I do know that we are coming to a point where it is going to start affecting the regular American people on the ground. Even if they are all government workers, they are still regular red-blooded Americans. I wasn't able to find any recent statistics about federal workers, but I found a 2011 Reuters poll that I'd like to cite for a second. The poll showed that the majority of people who work for the federal government tend to reliably vote for Democrat, and there are a couple of reasons for that. Of course, any public sector job is going to have union influence, and unions do tend to vote for Democrats. But in addition, if you are going to work for the federal government, you do take on a bit of acceptance about the fact that the federal government is taking care of you in your day-to-day life. And of course, you are going to want your employer to grow. If your employer starts to shrink, then you may find yourself out of a job in a very near future. And I think that's a fact that does hang a little bit over the Democrats' heads as they start to realize that this government shutdown could stretch on for longer than any other government shutdown in history. As I said before, there are a lot of people out there that don't want to see the government open back up. I don't know how many of them are completely sincere about it, but I know that there are a lot of people out there that don't want to see that. And the people that don't want to see the government open back up do tend to be Republicans, or at least Trump supporters. Conversely, the federal workers that are being most affected by all of this do tend to vote Democrat, as the Reuters poll showed, which means they are the direct constituents of the Democrat politicians. And the politicians are going to eventually start feeling the pressure as their constituents do start to miss their very first paychecks. In addition, there are a lot of people out there who are going to realize that we don't need to have the federal government taking care of every aspect of our lives. If this keeps going on for an extended period of time, the states might start looking at taking up legislation to take some of the things off of the federal government to make sure that their constituents are taken care of. And we could have a permanent shrinkage of the federal government because many of the programs that the government's putting out are no longer needed or necessary or have been transferred either to the private sector or the states. And of course, it might not just be federal programs that move out to the states or into the private sector. According to the Federal Reserve in St. Louis, Missouri, as of 4 days before the government shut down, there were 7 million unfilled jobs across this entire country that are begging for workers, and there are suddenly going to be 800,000 people who can no longer rely on their employers and are not going to be drawing a paycheck. I'm not sorry to say it, but if it was me and I had the capital to do so, I would start a job board and I would focus my efforts on matching federal employees that are furloughed to jobs in the private sector. Jobs that are not going to go away the next time that Democrats and Republicans have a squabble, or the next time that the politicians that I elected into office wanted to use me as a pawn in their grand scheme to make sure that their political agenda gets done. It's not fair to the workers to have them treated like that, no matter how I feel about the size and the scope of the federal government, and I would do anything that I could to try and help the federal workers escape the chaos that is the federal government currently. What do you think about the government shutdown? Has it affected you directly, or has it affected you indirectly at all? And what do you think we should be doing to stop it, if anything at all? I always welcome a thoughtful and positive discussion in the comment section below, and especially over on Twitter. That is at EdsBlog Twitter with a 1 in place of the I. Thanks as always for listening to this show and supporting this channel, and remember, never take the words of bloggers, podcasters, or journalists as gospel. Find all the facts and draw your own conclusions. Take care.
You're always there for me in my best hiding place. I'm not alone.